Listen to this. Anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes. Let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, and cry out, unclean, unclean. As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. This is Leviticus chapter 13, verses 45 and 46, and they're talking about lepers. And today in Mark 140, we're going to see a leper appearing on the scene and doing exactly the opposite of what Leviticus is prescribing. So let's read Mark 140. Kai erketai prosauton lepros, parakalon auton kai gonupeton, kai legon auto hoti ean theles dunasaime katharisai. Now, let's try to understand the structure of this sentence. Now, there is a verb here, erketai. This is the principal verb of the sentence, and the subject we're going to find here is this lepros, okay, which we're going to see is the leper, okay. So we have a subject, we have the verb, and then we have this prepositional phrase pros auton, which indicates to whom the subject, the leper, is approaching to, okay. And then we have this series of participle, parakalon, you see this ending on, gonupeton, and legon, all right, all connected by kai, and. These are all participles, and another participles, okay, all connected to the subject. Now, the first participle holds an object here, auton. The second participle is a verb by itself. The third participle holds actually a dative, auto, and it's to whom this action is referring to. All right, and it's actually an action of talking. All right, and this hoti, we've seen it sometimes before, is sort of column. It introduces and direct speech. Okay, because from now on we could put some quotation marks here. It's what the leper says. So, and the leper says, "Ean theles dunasai me katarisai." All right. So there's an if clause. We got it here. If plus a verb. So it's a conditional clause. So if this happens, this is the verb dunasai. This is the verb of the principal verb of the sentence that the leper speaks. And then you have this other construction, which is held by this verb, because this verb is the verb can, to be able to. So it needs an infinitive after it. Okay. And here you have it. So this is the infinitive form. Katarisai, and me is the object of this infinitive verb. So not as simple from a grammatical, syntactical point of view, but now we're going to dig into the grammar and we're going to find the translation of each term. Let's start translating. Kai and lepros, that was the subject, right? And we said this means leper, okay? These are leper that we anticipated. So this is the subject, leper. And the verb is erketai. We've seen this verb many times already. Is the verb erchomai. And the verb erchomai is one of the most used verb in Greek in terms of verb of movement, because it's the verb to go or to come, according to which type of action is taking place. And in this case, we are looking at this and reading this verse from this perspective of Jesus. So it's a leper coming to Jesus. All right. Notice that this is a third person singular in the present tense. Okay. We have commented on this many times. Mark likes to jump from the aorist, the basically the past tense, to the present tense, and he does that with a purpose to make his narration more vivid, and he does it again here. And a leper comes pros auton, toward him. All right. So this pros preposition, we've seen it. It's a preposition that indicates a movement towards somebody. Okay. It's usually very similar to the preposition ace. Okay. But pros is just toward something. Ace is more inside something. Okay. So Mark here is very specific. You don't go into somebody unless you are some kind of evil spirit. So this was a leper, so he moves toward Jesus. Okay. And a leper comes toward him, auton, right? Personal pronoun. Pros want the accusative case, and you have it here. Accusative masculine singular. And the leper comes toward him doing three actions. The first is parakalon. Okay, parakalon comes from the verb parakaleo. Okay, this is a very important verb. Okay, the verb parakaleo is made up of the preposition para and the verb kaleo. Okay, the verb kaleo means to call. Okay, now with the para in front, it means to call for. All right. So, and if you call somebody for you, it means that usually you call him because you need help from that person. Okay. So the verb parakaleo means to call somebody in help. Okay. In your help. This is the verb from which the paraclete term comes from, right? The Holy Spirit is also referred to in Scripture as the Paraclete because He is the one, the Holy Spirit, that is going to come to help us once Jesus is gone, after Jesus ascended to heaven. Okay, Jesus said, I'm gonna send you the Paraclete, the one that is gonna come to help you. Okay, your usually it's translated also your advocate, somebody that is gonna speak for you. It's gonna come, help you and speak for you. Okay, so this is what this leper is doing. He's not just calling Jesus, but he's calling for help. It's a desperate call for help. Right. So this is the first action, and here comes the leper toward him, calling for help. Parakalon auton, calling him. So this auton is the same as this auton. So calling him, calling Jesus for help. And now you see that this second action, kai and gonupeton, is within brackets. Okay, let's spend 5 minutes to understand why that is. Why? Because this expression kai gonupeton is not found in all of the most important, oldest manuscript of the New Testament. It's found, for example, in the Codex Sinaiticus, which is probably the most important, the oldest manuscript containing all the Bible available, 4th century. But it's not found, for example, in the Codex Alexandrinus. And so when all these very important old manuscripts do not exactly agree between each other, then this is usually highlighted by the bracket saying that these may not be original. Now we have a lot of certainty about this expression to be considered original. One, because one, it's found in the Codex Sinaiticus, probably the most important manuscript, and two, it agrees with the other synoptic gospels. So if you look at Luke, if you look at Matthew, and we're going to look at that quickly, they're going to have an expression there that mimics exactly this verb. Now, what is this? What is this verb about? The verb gonupeton, again, it's a participle, present, masculine singular, refers to the subject, lepros. We already seen this with parakalon. So we have a leper who was calling for help, and gonupeton. Now, the verb gonupeton comes from the participle gonupeton comes from the verb gonupeteo. Okay, exactly as parakalon comes from the verb parakaleo. Now, gonupeteo has this first part, gonus, that indicates a part of the body, which is the knee. Okay, and then the second part of the verb peteo actually comes from the root of the verb pipto, which means to fall. Okay, to fall. So fall, knee, fall on your knee. That's the meaning of the verb, kneeling down. Okay, so this leper first calls out for help, then he kneels down or falls, literally falls on his knees. And then, and legon we've seen it many times, comes from the verb lego, which means to say, to speak. Okay, so, and there comes a leper toward him, calling out for help, kneeling down, and saying auto to him. You see this omega with Yoda subscript. This is a dative case, so indicates to whom the action is referring to whom. So is saying to him. Okay, so this leper first goes toward him, then calls him, then he kneels down, and then he says to him, to Jesus, hoti, that. Or, as we said, this we can completely ignore it. It's just a signal that introduces the direct speech. What is the leper saying? And the leper says, ean theles. This is the conditional clause. So ean is the if, okay, that introduces the conditional clause. Here we could put a comma. Ean theles, if this happens, then this can happen. All right. Now, the verb theles comes from the verb thelo. It's a very important verb because it's a verb to will or to want. All right. And it's conjugated in the second person singular. Okay. Because leper is talking to Jesus, you. But it's conjugated in the subjunctive, which indicates a possibility. Okay, it's a possibility. So this is the delicacy of the leper. The leper doesn't go to Jesus and says, do this for me, or not even, can you do this for me? He says, ean theles. Okay, if there is a chance that you want, okay, if you want, if that is your will, okay, but only if that is your will, dunasai me katharisai. What can Jesus do for him? Well, dunasai. Now, what is dunasai? Dunasai, it's another verb, comes from the verb, let me write it here, dunamai. Okay, dunamai, um, which means to be able, to, all right? Or it's basically the verb can, okay? If you will, if you are willing, and this is conjugated in the present tense, okay? Present second person singular, okay? You can, okay? You can. Now, the verb dunamai has the root of dunamis, okay? And dunamis is a word that means force or power, okay? In English, we have many words that come from this Greek root, like, for example, dynamics, okay? Dynamics, or something that is dynamic, is something that is in movement. Why? Because there are some forces acting there. Okay, because they come from the Greek dynamis, which means force, power, and the verb dynamai means to have that force, to have that power, to exercise that power. And so, in general, it means if you have the power to do something, it means that you can. All right. So, if you want, if you're willing, you have the power to do what? Well, the infinitive, it's right here, katharizai. So this is an infinitive form in the aorist tense, okay, of the verb, a verb that we already seen before in Mark, which is katharizo, okay, katharizo. The verb katharizo means to make clean, okay, to clean, to cleanse, okay, to clean, to cleanse, to make clean. So if you will, you have the power to make me, like in English. So this is the first person singular personal pronoun in the accusative, direct object. You have the power to make me clean. So let's put all this together for the translation of Mark 1:40. And a leper comes toward him, calling out for help, and kneeling down and telling him, if you will, you have the power to make me clean. So, what's wrong with this? Well, there's everything wrong with this. This is not what you would expect a leper to do. Remember what we read from Leviticus? Lepers are supposed to stay away from society. They're supposed to stay at a distance from people. And whenever they get close to people for some reason, they need to alert immediately that they are unclean. They need to cry out, unclean, unclean, so that everybody has the possibility to move away from them. But they need to stay away from society. Now, this is exactly what this leper is not doing, the opposite of what this leper is doing. He's walking toward him. This first part here, ergetai prosauton, the fact that the leper is actually walking toward him, this is already a no-no, a big no-no. He's not supposed to do that. He's not supposed to get close to people. All right. Second thing, he's parakalon, he's calling out for help. No, he's not supposed to call out for help. Nobody can possibly help him. He's supposed to call out, unclean, unclean, stay away from me. Okay. Third, he kneels down, he falls down on his knees. Why is he doing that? And three, he says these words, if you will, you have the power to make me clean. Now, we need to understand this request. Now, the idea of leprosy, which was this very scary disease that would spread out all over the skin of a person, would make in the Jewish community, would make somebody ritually unclean. And if somebody was ritually unclean, would not be able to participate in the society, wouldn't be able to participate in the sacrifice, he wouldn't be allowed inside the temple, and so on. Okay. Remember, for example, during during Jesus' passion, right? The high priests don't want to enter the palace of Pilate because they don't want to become ritually unclean, right? So this idea of being ritually unclean was a very important part of the Jewish society. If you're ritually unclean, before being readmitted inside the community, you need to go through a certain process of purification. Okay. And lepers, for their status, they cannot be made clean because they are unclean by definition. All right. So that's why they need to stay away from society. And yet, this poor guy comes to Jesus and says, you have the power to make me clean. Well, leprosy was considered at that time a sickness, a skin disease that was not curable. It was not Nobody expected anybody to be able to cure such a disease. You just had to stay away from society and hope that by itself it would go away. That was the only possibility that a person had to acquire the ritually clean status again, that the disease would go away by itself. Now, there's a very important, very illuminating passage that I want to read to you here. It's a passage from the same chapter of Leviticus, chapter 13, that I read at the beginning of the video. And it talks about the regulation about people that were found to have skin diseases. This is how Leviticus 13 starts. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when anyone has a swelling or a rash or a shiny spot on their skin, that may be defiling skin disease, may be leprosy. Okay. They must be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons who is a priest. The priest is to examine the sore on the skin, and if the hair in the sore has turned white and the source appears to be more than skin deep, it's a defiling skin disease, it's leprosy. And when the priest examines the person, he shall pronounce that ritually or ceremonially unclean. So this was the prescription from Leviticus. When somebody would notice on their skin something weird, they would have to immediately go to a priest, and the priest would examine the skin disease and try to determine if that skin disease was a defiling skin disease, like a leprosy type of disease that would make that person ceremonially unclean. If the priest um, declares and realizes that that is a defiling, it's really a skin disease like leprosy, at that point the priest has to pronounce the person ceremonially unclean. So that person at that point cannot be part of the usual Jewish rituals. It needs to stay away. And there's, if you keep reading Leviticus 13, you're going to have all the rules for how that person has to behave, stay away from society for a certain period, then come back to be checked again, and so on. And if the disease goes, it turns out to be not what it was thought, then the priest has the power to pronounce that person clean again. All right. But from Leviticus, you see that the priest is only somebody that can have the power to pronounce, so declare somebody to be clean or not clean according to the status of the disease. If the disease is spreading, the priest is going to declare the person unclean. If the priest re-examines that person and sees that actually the disease is reducing, then it's going to pronounce that person clean again. But of course, there's nothing in this declaration that has anything to do with the fact that the priest has the power to make somebody clean or not. Okay, it's just the power of declaring something that already is. Here in Mark, that leper is not asking, of course, Jesus to declare him clean. Of course, he knows that he's ceremonially unclean. He's asking something more. He's asking, can you heal me? Now, how absurd this request is, we can understand if we read another passage of the Old Testament. There's a very interesting story found in the second book of Kings in the Old Testament, chapter 5. It talks about Naaman, who was a great commander under the king of Aram, but he had a problem. He suffered from leprosy. And so his wife, Naaman's wife, had a girl, a servant, and this servant gives this piece of advice. If only my Lord, meaning Naaman the leper, were with the prophet who is in Samaria, which, by the way, was Elisha, okay, he would cure him of his leprosy. So what happens? Well, Naaman went in and told the king what the girl had said. And so the king of Aram said, okay, go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel. So the king of Aram sends Naaman to the king of Israel with a letter saying, look, I heard that you can heal, may be able to heal this guy from leprosy. Can you do something for him? And see what the king replies. So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, when this letter reaches you, know that I've sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him from leprosy. Now, there is a bit of misunderstanding here because, of course, the mistress was talking about Elisha, the prophet. Okay. But the king Aram thinks that the guy that can cure Naaman from leprosy, is the king of Israel. And so he sends the letter addressing the king of Israel, saying, I heard that you can cure him of leprosy. Okay. And hear this out. When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me. So this type of reaction, tearing clothes, you probably remember, is the same reaction that the high priest has during the fake trial of Jesus, when Jesus basically says, yes, I am the Son of God, right? And the high priest says, blasphemy, and he tears off his clothes. So this is the same type of reaction, right? It's blasphemy. So he reads this letter and he says, this guy really thinks that I can cure somebody from leprosy? Who does he think I am? God? Am I God? Ani Elohim, says the Hebrew Bible. Am I God? So you see, if you simply hint at that time that somebody had the power to heal anybody, you would probably imply that that person is God. That's the only possibility. Only God could cure leprosy at that time. They didn't expect leprosy to be a disease cured by any doctor. Only God could do that. And if you hinted at somebody that may be able to cure leprosy, well, they wouldn't take you seriously. Actually, this guy is saying he's trying to pick up a fight with me, okay? Because he doesn't understand why he would possibly in the world ask him something so ridiculous like cure somebody from leper. Am I God to do that? Now, this is so interesting because if we put this in context and we relate it back to Mark 140, we understand how absurd that request from that leper to Jesus is. He's saying, if you will, you have the power to make me clean, to cure from my leprosy. And the king of Israel would have said, hey, what are you talking about? Who do you think Jesus is? God? Bingo! So if we go back to Mark 140 and we reread what this leper said, now we understand exactly the how deep this proclamation is. Ean theles, says the leper. So the first thing is, if you are willing, if you want, how's that possible? Does his healing depend on Jesus' will, not on God's will? Dunasai, you have the ability, you have the power to make me clean. What? You, Jesus, have the power to make me clean? You, simple human being, have the power to make me clean? Not God? And why did Jesus not reply, hey, who do you think I am? God? Ani Elohim? Am I God? You're saying if I will? If I have the power to do that? No, it's God. No, and Jesus doesn't say anything about that. And the leper recognizes that and recognizes that his healing is only dependent upon Jesus' will and upon Jesus' power. In other words, the leper is recognizes Jesus to be divine. If you think about it, this if you will and this you can are possibly a foreshadowing of the same prayer that Jesus prays in the Gethsemane. Remember, in the agony of the Gethsemane, Jesus is praying to the Father, saying, please make this chalice pass away from me if you will. If you want, everything is possible to you. You can do everything. If you want, your will be done, not mine. So Jesus understands that everything that happens is upon the Father's will. And the Father's is able, if he wills, to do everything. And the leper recognized that Jesus is exactly on the same level. If Jesus wills, he's able to do anything, even cure the leper from a disease that everybody knew was uncurable. And so, in these words here, the leper absolutely and clearly is giving Jesus, recognizing Jesus' divine authority. Not convinced yet? Well, let's go back and look at this action. So, not only in his words, but even in his actions, he's showing that he is recognizing Jesus to be divine. Not only he says, if you will, you can, he does this. We seen that. Go nu peton means falling on his knees. Now, I told you that we will look at other synoptic gospel to see how they describe this scene. Okay, and so if you look at this, you're gonna see in Matthew, for example, it says, "Kai idu," and behold, lepros, a leper, proselzon, coming forward. Look at the verb that Matthew uses, proskune. Okay, proskune. If we go to, let me pull up Luke. Okay, let me pull up Luke. So Matthew says proskune. So this leper, proskune, this is the verb that Matthew uses. And Luke says, kai idon ton yezun, and seeing Jesus, peson epi prosopon. Peson comes from pipto, okay? It's the verb that we saw before, which means to fall. And Luke says, falling epi on prosopon, face. Falling on his face, all right? So both Mark, Matthew, and Luke all agree that this guy came in front of Jesus. He kneeled, says Mark. He fell on his knees, says Mark. Look at, he fell on his face. So not only on his knees, on his face, completely on the ground, with his face on the ground. And Matthew adds proskune. Now, what is proskune? Proskune is an extremely important verb, okay? The verb proskuneo means to prostrate yourself in front of somebody, okay? In at least an attitude of veneration. But proskuneo is also more than that. Is the act of worshiping God. Now, proskuneo, it's true that it's used in the Bible in two different setups. Sometimes it's used to indicate the type of veneration that is due to very important people, maybe kings. But it's also true that proskuneo is always used to indicate the type of worshiping that people perform in front of God. For example, proskuneo is used by Matthew to describe what the Magi did in front of baby Jesus. He says that they got there, they saw the baby, and proskuneo. They prostrate themselves in front of him and worshiped him. So proskuneo is the verb that is used to indicate the worshiping, of course, of God. Okay. So all three synoptic gospel, we get absolutely the same idea. This guy, and we go back to our mark here, this guy, this leper, get close to Jesus, breaking all the rules because he's a leper, and he kneels, he falls on his knees, or says, look, he falls on his face, and Matthew specifically says prosekune, worshipped. This leper really recognizes Jesus to be divine. He prostrated himself in front of him and talked as if he was talking to God.